Welcome back. Senator Tom Coburn, a Republican of Oklahoma, joining us from Capitol Hill today. And in studio, Jeremy Peters, congressional reporter with New York Times, and Niels Lesniewski, CQ Roll Call congressional reporter. Senator, let me begin with the first question. The House has passed a continuing resolution that the Senate passed this week to keep the government running for this budget year, avoiding a government shutdown. What do you think that says about the process going forward for negotiations on some sort of grand bargain?
Well, I think the first thing it shows is we actually passed an appropriation bill, even though it was called a continuing resolution. The vast majority of what was passed were appropriation bills. So it was kind of an omnibus appropriation bill, but it had very limited amendment opportunity in it. So we're still dysfunctional in terms of having input. But I think it's a great thing. The House passed it right after we passed it. And so we now have some certainty. The problems for a grand bargain, let me put in context first, what we've done to the agencies by having them run on CRs for 3 years is we've really handicapped their ability to be effective without giving direction and changes and giving them something to plan ahead on so they can actually manage the jobs that we've tasked them to do. I think has been horrible over the last 3 years. A grand bargain's, everybody knows what a grand bargain needs to be made of. A grand bargain isn't hard to get to. What is hard to get to is the political dynamics in terms of how it affects elections. And the biggest disease in Washington, in my opinion, is people care more about the next election than they do the future of the country. And so if we get to a grand bargain, you'll have some people come off of quit worrying about whether or not they get reelected and really want to fix the country. And if we don't, it'll be all about people protecting their parochial interest and their political position, and the country will suffer markedly from it.
Well, Senator, on that point, the House this week passed what by most measures would be considered a highly political document, their budget. The Senate is getting ready to pass its own budget, which is another political document. Neither of
it's just as highly political.
I'm not disagreeing. Neither of these has a chance of ever becoming law. So I wonder why you and your colleagues aren't spending more time trying to find middle ground instead of going through what are effectively just show votes.
Well, first of all, they want to get paid, and if they don't pass a budget in each house, they won't get paid based on what we've done in the past. That's number one. Number two is having finally, in 4 years, having a budget where you can actually offer amendments and highlight things that you think need to be changed in the federal government is an important exercise because, for example, last night 79 or 76 senators voted to eliminate the medical device tax. If you vote on that in the budget, when that amendment, if it's ever allowed to come up, it'll go through the Senate and it'll go through the House, and we'll actually change that because it's counterproductive and prudence in terms of supplying equipment to people, whether it be a diabetic or a congestive heart patient or emphysemic patient. So that's the other reason why it's good. I don't doubt that we need to spend some time, and there's a lot of talks going on which are being discussed at this time about reaching a grand bargain. And the way you reach a grand bargain is you reach the president with his sleeves rolled up, working with senators of the other party and representatives of the other party, and building a consensus and then bringing his team along.
And I should note for our viewers that we are all talking on this Friday as the Senate is taking up the Senate Democrats' budget, and there is a marathon voting session going on this day. Go ahead, Niels.
Right, and Senator, I want to talk a little bit about the way that these votes go forward. You say that it's important to get senators on record on things like the medical device tax. There's all sorts of other votes where you want to get senators on record. Do you think that there's a better way of doing this going forward, that it's time to revisit the way the 1974 Budget Act is written and the way the vote-a-rama comes together?
No, look, it's only novel to you all because we haven't done it in 4 years. I've done it 4 times before. There's nothing wrong with this process. It's the only time in the Senate where your minority rights are truly protected, where you can offer an amendment with a 51 vote threshold. Are there political games being played? Yes, there always will be. But there are substantive amendments. I'm going to have about 15 amendments on eliminating duplication. You know, we won't do it. But I want them to vote against it. They don't want to eliminate the $200 billion a year in duplication that comes out of this government every year. So they're going to get a vote on it because they ought to have to explain to the American people why we have 47 job training programs that cost $20 billion a year that don't work, and they're not willing to reform them and put metrics on them and clean them up, and where it will actually give somebody a skill for a lifetime and save us some money.
Senator, I want to switch gears for a moment and move on to a subject that is even in the headlines a little bit more these days in the budget, which is gun control. Last night, Harry Reid said that he will move a bill with universal background checks to the Senate floor. You were part of a coalition of senators that was discussing whether or not this was feasible. There's a poll out this morning that says 85% of all gun owners support universal background checks. You're an NRA member, but it appears that you've not signed on to this bill. You must have some pretty grave concerns if this is something that the American public overwhelmingly supports. So what are those concerns?
Well, no, don't confuse two things. They support the checking to make sure you're not selling a gun to somebody that shouldn't have it. Almost every member of the Senate does that. How you do it is important. If you do it, which is presently the way that is designed, or where we fell apart was on the record-keeping side of it. And if you take that same poll among those same people, 45 or 50% of them absolutely don't want any record-keeping because they don't trust the government to not use that at some time in the future to limit their Second Amendment rights. But having said that, put that aside, I don't know a Republican that doesn't want to have significantly enhanced and universal background checks. How you do that and protect the Second Amendment at the same time is very important. And we were very, very close, and the gun groups did not like the fact that if you actually follow the law, go to the portal, know that you're not selling it, what they wanted you to is be able to prove in the future that you did that. Well, that doesn't fit with American jurisprudence. American jurisprudence is you're innocent until you're proven guilty, rather than you're guilty till you're proven innocent. And the fact is the time between the sale of a gun and one gun used in a crime, on average, is 11 years. So what we were going to do is put at risk gun owners who actually followed the law and 11 years later can't find a piece of paper that said they did it right, and the presumption is you're guilty. And the vast majority of gun owners in this country and law-abiding citizens do not want to sell a gun to somebody that shouldn't have it, and they'll follow this. And so where we got locked up was on those areas. And the idea of a universal portal where you can actually know you're not selling a gun to somebody, American citizens, gun owners in this country, will absolutely follow the law. And they'll do it in a responsible way, and we'll actually have a background check on the vast majority of people. And that's what we want.
But following up on that, Senator, with the bill that Senator Reid is bringing to the floor, or has announced plans to bring to the floor, without that changing, do you think that there's any chance that he could possibly get 60 votes on the bill as he has it drafted now, or is he going to have to change it if he actually wants it to pass? And do you believe he actually wants it to pass?
I believe he actually wants it to pass. I believe all the Senate wants a bill to pass. You know, there are things that we can do that will limit a lot of the problems in terms of transfers. But the point I'd make is we have to recognize that most gun owners today are upstanding, law-abiding citizens, and no matter what law we write, the criminals aren't going to follow it. And so to have a record in a gun dealer's book on a gun that might have been transferred or was going to be transferred at a gun show is too late, because once the crime's committed, it's about law enforcement after the fact, after a crime's committed. What we want to do is prevent that crime from happening in the first place. And that's why you want to get universal background checks, or at least an enhanced one. And I think we have a way to do it if we'll trust the American people. And the enforcement on it is very, very easy. All you have to do is 2 or 3 sting operations in gun shows around this country, and you will have law-abiding citizens checking on every gun transfer.
So, Senator, just to clarify then, does this pass the Senate, universal background checks?
Well, some type will. Yes, it will. But it depends on how you do it. And, you know, there is a legitimate frustration in a lot of gun country in states that have concealed carry and that have wide open, responsible individuals with guns on whether or not you can trust the federal government with data. So, is it somewhat out of kilter? It would be seen that way from people who live in the Northeast and maybe the Northwest, but in the rest of the country, it's not. So I think we can get there. My hope is we can get there. I don't want to ever sell one of my guns to somebody that is mentally impaired or somebody that's a felon.
So Senator, then, are you offering language on the floor? And if so, what does a universal background check look like to you then? How does it work?
You want me to explain the process?
Well, how do you want it to work so that it protects the Second Amendment?
I want it to work that if you want to buy my gun, you have to come to me having checked through a portal with the FBI, the National Instant Criminal Background Check, and you get a certificate for them that's good for 30 days, that you're not on the list, that you're not a criminal, and that you're not mentally impaired. And then you have to show that to me, and I have to document that who you are is who you say you are through a photo ID, and then I know that you've been cleared on the list, and I can then sell you a gun. If you can't show me that, then I can't sell you a gun. And then I break the law by selling you a gun if you're do not have one of these validity statements.
And from what you've just explained, do you think that differs from what Senator Reid is going to put on the floor?
Yes.
How so?
Well, they're going to require any gun that's sold in a gun show to go through a federally firearm license background check. And they're not going to do that. Because, first of all, it's going to cause a fee. So we're going to raise the cost of purchasing a gun at a gun show. And a lot of the gun control people would love to see that happen. But it won't be effective because if there's a true portal out there, all they'll do is make an agreement that I'm not buying the gun here at this gun show, and I'll meet you a week later and I'll bring you my portal certificate, and then I'll sell the gun and I won't get charged $50 or $100 to have it go into a federally firearm license book.
All right. So Senator, you think that's not effective, but does that pass the Senate?
Will their bill pass the Senate?
Yeah.
I don't think so. Not at 60 votes. And if it does pass the Senate, it certainly won't pass the House. And the whole idea is to get something that'll pass both houses.
Well, Senator, maybe you can help explain what exactly the rationale is of people who are afraid of there being a federal record of gun owners. Because when I go to the drugstore to buy cold medicine, I have to hand over my driver's license. They have my name, my address, they have a record of that. Why should that standard not be applied to a product that is much more dangerous, a gun?
Well, because it's not written into the Second Amendment that you have an individual right affirmed by multiple Supreme Court precedents that should be no inhibition if you're not on a list that you can purchase a gun. That's number one, and that's solid. And so they don't want any encroachment on that. There is a difference between those two, and because there's a worry of a list and confiscation. And
do you think the federal government is going to confiscate people's guns?
No, but remember, there are a lot of people in this country that don't, and rightly so, given the behavior of the federal government in terms of its fiscal capability, in terms of its regulatory overreach, in terms of its poking its nose into every area of everybody's life, in terms of domestic drones, in terms of all this other stuff, that you have created a certain amount of paranoia in this country, and some of it's justified. because we've become intrusive and obtrusive, and we're not a limited government anymore. And you know, if you go back to our founders, the best government is the smallest government. The most freedom comes from the most limited government. And so what we're saying is gun owners will be responsible. Matter of fact, they're the most responsible people in this country because they know how to use a weapon, how to handle a weapon, how to store a weapon. And what they're saying is we don't want a thing that will inhibit that right, because we're seeing all the rest of our rights limited every day.
If I may shift gears once again from the gun issue onto another hot button, which is immigration. You know that there's a group of senators that have been meeting regularly that is aiming to put out a plan the week of April 8th on some sort of comprehensive immigration overhaul. Senator Paul gave a speech not long ago outlining what he thinks should be done. Where do you stand on the so-called pathway to citizenship question in the broader immigration debate that's going on these days?
I don't think you're going to get a comprehensive immigration bill until you can satisfy the American public that we have a way of knowing our border is secure. And our border is not secure. And so, you know, you can have that discussion about all those other things, but you're never going to get the votes till you can demonstrate and certify that we have secured a border.
How would you go about, Senator, how would you go about putting the resources on the border needed to demonstrate the sort of security that you think the American people would need in order to be able to get an immigration bill done?
Well, I actually have spent several days, some of it on horseback on the Arizona border. I've spent a lot of time on our borders. And if the American people went there, our strategy today is to cause funneling of those that are trying to come across illegally and those that are trying to bring drugs in illegally. We're never going to solve this problem until we address it in the mountainous areas and in some of the other areas the same way we address it in the easy areas, which is a double fence with sensors, with the utilizing the technology that we have to know when it's broken and when it comes through. Look, we have areas in Arizona right now where the Border Patrol has cut a gate so they can come across because they kept cutting the fence. And it's not a big fence, it's a barbed wire fence, but so they wouldn't have to keep repairing the fence. They just made a gate so they can walk through.
So the fence isn't working, so your solution is to build another fence?
No. You have to see this in perspective. If you go look at the fence that we've put up, the real fence, it's fairly effective. They can put things up against it, but when it's monitored, it markedly slows. If you look in the San Diego border area, we've pretty well controlled that. Where we have good fencing and good monitoring, we don't have much coverage coming across there. We just haven't done it everywhere else. And we've said, well, it's too hard. No, we have to prioritize the assets to actually control the border. And it's not just fencing. It's good intelligence on both sides of the border in terms of what's going on. It's utilizing a multi-pronged approach. But the point is we can control our border. We have chosen not to yet.
So what would be your measure for determining when the border is secure? Some concrete numbers or achievements that have been reached that you would say, okay, now we can start admitting people as citizens?
My would be the Congress would make that decision every year. Are we maintaining the border? Have we controlled the border? Have we done what we need to do? And I don't even want to talk about the rest of it till we do that. Because people in this country aren't worried about immigration. They're worried about illegal immigration. And they're worried that once we have some type of bill that allows any connection to those that have come here illegally, any pathway to citizenship, all you'll do is see another flood of people come across the border.
Well, Senator, how would you ever get to a point, if Congress was asked to do that every year, to recertify this? The way
it's not hard. It's not. Look, you're asking questions without the knowledge of ever been down on the border. And sometimes you have to trust us. If we go down there and actually spend 3 or 4 days across the whole Arizona border and the West Texas, Southwest Texas border, you have to see that in your mind before you know what we're talking about. The fact is we have tremendous holes that we in our border today that we control by funneling. And that's not a secure border. Regardless, even if the numbers are down, most of the numbers are down because of our economic picture. The amount of drugs are not down. The amount of mules carrying drugs are not down. The amount of spotters are not down. So the fact is it's not there. And until you give me the confidence that we're actually doing one of the primary goals that we're charged with, which is defending this country and protecting its borders, I don't really want to have a discussion about any other aspect of it.
Well, how would you become confident enough that enough was being done? Would it have to be a certain number or rate of apprehensions? What specifically are you looking for?
Look, if you control the border, there's not going to be any apprehensions.
So how do you measure it then? How do you measure security?
You measure security is that anything that's coming into the country is coming through our checkpoints, period.
We have about a few minutes left.
Well, as we get into the last couple of minutes that we have here, one of the other questions that has come up is the way forward for the Republican Party more broadly. I wanted to get your thoughts on the outline from the Republican National Committee on the way forward and other...
I really can't help you with it because I don't ever think about Republicans and Democrats as far as parties. You know, I'm a term-limited senator. I think we concentrate on Republicans and Democrats way too much and not on the individuals and what they'll do and how they'll perform and whether they're going to think long-term versus short-term politically. And I think the parties have actually hurt us in Washington. Because we tend to check and think in the short term on the next election rather than what should we be doing for the country. And so I don't pay any attention to that. I don't look at it. I don't participate. I've never been to a Republican National Convention in my life, never will. I don't think that's the important structure. I think getting great people who have real experience to run for public office who aren't aligned to a particular ideology but are aligned to common sense and fixing and curing the problems that are in front of us today are the most important thing.
Well, you're one of the most conservative members of the Senate. Let's look at it then as a matter of ideology and less one of party. Conservatives seems to have a real problem in this country right now. People don't believe that conservatives are empathetic, and I wonder if you think that is a problem for the movement that you're a part of.
I don't think so at all, and I don't agree with the label conservatives not being empathetic. Matter of fact, let me just give you a question. If we fix our problems today, we actually will secure the safety nets for a ton of people who actually need our help. For the mom that is a single mom that is working every day but needs help with her children or might need help with her health care. By not fixing our problems, what we're going to guarantee to that single mom with a child is that there isn't going to be a safety net left. And people who think that's alarmist haven't studied the international economic scene, haven't looked at our debt to GDP ratios, and haven't looked at what is coming in terms of when the interest rates start rising, and we're going to lose another $650 billion out of our budget to interest costs that aren't going to go for the very programs that are meant to actually help those individuals. Well, so speaking a message of helping people become successful rather than helping them become dependent and down is a much stronger message that will actually accomplish something for those people. And so that's real conservatism.
That sounds like compassionate conservatism, right?
Well, that's conservatism to me. We all ought to be compassionate.
Senator, you have tried to work across party lines with your Democratic colleagues. You've been part of a gang of 6 on fiscal cliff talks, which turned into the gang of 8, working on immigration, or excuse me, on the gun control legislation. Do these so-called gang of 8s, gang of 6, do they work?
Yeah, well, you build relationships and you build the core that's going to get. If we get a enhanced background checks out, it'll be because of the work that Chuck Schumer and I and Joe Manchin did. If we get one, and look, you all post a whole lot more partisanship than actually is here. There are great relationships in the Senate. Great talks. There's a political flavor and then there's the policy flavor. We get along very well on trying to hammer out policy, but again, driving for the next election drives the political talk and the partisan talk. which is negative. And that's what's wrong. We have too many people more interested in the politics than the policy.
So Senator, let me ask you then, because you plan to leave, term limited. I mean, how do you want to, what are you going to do after you leave the Senate to keep at this? Because you've been relentless about offering amendments to cut out waste and things like that. How do you keep at it if you're not in the Senate?
Well, first of all, it'll be somebody else's job. You know, that just behind the question would be the presumption that other people can't do more and better of what I've done, and they can. And it breeds this, well, only we can do it. You know, America's full of millions of people out there that can do a far better job than we're doing in Washington right now. They have a whole lot more experience in life. They have better judgments. They're not so ego insecure that they have to hold a position of elected office, and they wouldn't worry about it. What we need is more people here who don't care whether they're here or not, but care about our country.
All right. Senator Tom Coburn, Republican of Oklahoma. Thank you very much, sir.
You bet. Good to talk to you.
Let me turn to both of you and just go through. We've got a lot of hot button issues here to talk about. So let's begin with the budget. What'd you hear from the senator there, Niels Lesniewski?
Well, the budget, particularly what Senator Coburn was saying, was that, you know, that everyone knows the outlines for where a grand bargain would be, and it would be just a matter of getting there. So that's the first nugget. The other piece is the extent to which he was interested in and thinking that the appropriations process may actually function, and the importance of actually getting that back to functioning, because he pointed out something that is pointed out most frequently by members of the Appropriations Committee, that running the government on these sort of stopgap continuing resolutions is not an ideal way to run the government, because you end up with departments and agencies running programs that they shouldn't really be running anymore, because you have no way to get rid of them.
Jeremy Peters, on gun control. Universal background checks comes to the floor when they return from their Easter Passover break. What did you hear from the senator?
Well, I hear that he thinks a broad measure is not going to pass. I think he said the Senate will be difficult enough, but he pointed out another hurdle, which is, of course, the House of Representatives, which is more conservative than the Senate, and the Republicans control it. So it sounds like, I think, he believes that anything that goes through is going to be limited in scope. So
does he get to offer amendments to change it to how he would like to see it done, as he explained to all of us?
Yes, I think that is going to be the process through which we see this play out. I think there are going to be a lot of different amendments offered. Of course, Dianne Feinstein's bill will be an amendment banning assault weapons, and I think we know that that's not going to pass. Harry Reid said the other day that he thinks that doesn't even have 40 votes. So there's going to have to be a lot of distance that gets closed right now that is just, I think, really, really immense.
And what about ammunition clips, limiting the amount of ammunition? Is that going to get a vote?
I think yes. I think the problem is probably not going to be whether or not these items get votes. The president was very forceful about that in the State of the Union, and I think the argument that he made is a difficult one for opponents of stricter gun laws to refute. I believe most Americans see this as a matter of, yes, let's have our senators and representatives vote this up or down. The problem, of course, is going to be whether it meets the threshold for passage, and I don't think that these items seem to have a whole lot of support in either house right now.
Immigration reform. Niels Lesniewski, I mean, this is from a conservative saying, I'm not even going to talk about this other stuff until we confirm that the border is secure.
Right. That was one of the most fascinating parts, I think, of this whole interview, was that when the three of us attempted to press Senator Coburn on what he means by some sort of concrete, deliverable way to secure the border, he suggested that every year Congress verify how that's done. And frankly, what I was attempting to get at through a question was the idea that Congress is asked to do something through a regular process every year, just procedurally, even if it's a good idea, is difficult to even conceive.
And Jeremy Peters, if if that is the line that Republicans use, we're not even going to talk about the other stuff until the border is secure. What's the possibility that a pathway to citizenship is included in some sort of immigration bill?
I think the possibility is still quite high. I think that Senator Coburn represents a certain wing of the party that has always said border security above all else. And frankly, there are a lot of members of the Senate for whom the border will never be secure enough. Listening to that interview, it made me think how hard it's going to be to persuade some of those people.
All right, Jeremy Peters with the New York Times, Niels Lesniewski with CQ Roll Call. Thank you both. Appreciate it.